Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Welcome all. Chapter 13, summary. Verse 1 to 24 was the 6 words that we have expounded. Verse 24 to 26, we had a general discussion about Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga just means self-knowledge. And the highlight of Jnana Yoga was actually the 5 stages, and the 5 stages culminate to Jnana Yoga. Now, the last stage of this Jnana Yoga was Nididhyasanam. Okay, so when I say Jnana Yoga, I'm just talking about Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam. I'm just talking about listening, reflecting, and continuing to be involved in this self-knowledge through the course of time. And the reason for this is because of our minds, our habits, our old ways of thinking, our cultural grown up, the way we have been taught to think, to interface, to communicate, to engage. That's just going to keep on coming. So, even this is the funny thing, is even after we hear this knowledge, the person still wakes up gloomy. And you're like, well, how is this possible? And so, and it's an important point, because often we think that if I feel gloomy, then something's wrong. I don't have this knowledge. No, you have to understand this understanding between Purusha and Prakriti. The Prakriti is going to undergo the gloominess and the cheerfulness and all sorts of varying emotions, ups and downs. However, despite the fact of gloominess and then the cheerfulness maybe in the evening, it depends on what we do in the circumstances, there's a different relationship about it. So before knowing the Purusha or the Kshetranya, the knower, it was much harder to deal with it, because all we had was the access to the Prakriti, the world of form, the world of techniques, the world of various forms of meditations. So it was a lot harder to get rid of it. It was a lot more challenging. But after we bring this knowledge forward, after we bring the knowledge of Purusha, then see the gloominess and all of these varying emotions continues. And by the way, it's not just gloominess, because samsara includes both plus and minus, in other words, ups and downs. Then the person says, okay, yes, this is going on indeed. This is progressing. However, there's a different relationship to what is going on. In other words, you simply understand that the person that you're carrying around, the body that you're wearing, when I say you, the Purusha that's wearing this Prakriti body, in the light of this knowledge, understands this Prakriti body will keep going through its prarabdha karma, will keep on going through its various life circumstances, and that will bring obviously different emotions. So in other words, you're still having a different relationship to it. It's not getting so much caught up as before. And then verse 27 to 34, and 34 is the last verse of chapter 13. So verse 27 to 34 is going to talk about the benefits of this knowledge. The other way to say it is, what are the features of a Jivanmukta? What does a Jivanmukta understand? What is the direct knowledge like? But also, what is the benefit of this knowledge, having gone through chapter 13 and having assimilated it properly? And then verse 27, so this is the first benefit, because I just said that verse 27 to 34 are the benefits. So verse 27 is benefit number 1. And we said this last week, that it is a balanced perspective. Now, why is it a balanced perspective? What does balanced mean? It means it's horizontal. Unbalanced means it's either like this or it's either like that. So in other words, if it's like this, what does this imply? There's an equal weight on both sides. In other words, there's an equal knowledge on both sides. If it's unbalanced, you take away Purusha knowledge, then immediately the tilt falls onto one side. And therefore, no matter what we do, something's still incomplete. Something still feels off. Something still feels there's more to it. There's got to be more to it. And this moreness, this sense of feeling there's got to be more to it, this is what we call it the search. And it goes for a long time. So it's only when this knowledge comes that this knowledge starts to balance this equation, balance this general life. So without knowledge of Purusha, or without knowledge of the Kshetranya, what happens? We are swimming in the world of Prakriti. Ironically, not really swimming in the world of Prakriti, because the world is a mixture of Prakriti and Purusha. We already discussed this. But for the individual that lacks that knowledge, is as though swimming in the world samsara of Prakriti only. And what kind of effects does this have? Well, we can observe it. Effects like looking for creative ways to find happiness, And this is why we have a new book released on how to be happy. It can be either adjust your metabolism, health, different vitamins, exercise more, improve your relationships, right? Go and see your grandchildren, kind of forgive everyone. So this is all fine. And this is all showing us how the person deals with the lack of Purusha knowledge in the world of Prakriti, because you got no choice. All you can do is just address the relative circumstances. So then you go and search. There are great books like The Happiness, Absolute Happiness, The Happiness Trap. I read so many books, and they always had to deal with either the physical body, the gross body, or the subtle body, the mind. That's basically the summary of what happiness books are about. Okay, now verse 28 will be obviously benefit number 2, freedom from mortality, after having ascertained this knowledge. And this is defined by the word param gatim inside the verse. And if you know the Pavamana mantra, and it goes like this: Asato ma sadgamaya. In other words, take me from asat to sat, take me from untruth to the truth. Tamaso ma jyotir gamaya. In other words, take me from tamas into the light, from darkness into light. And then mrityor ma amritam gamaya. Take me from death to immortality, amritam. So in other words, verse 28 actually, or in other words, self-knowledge actually fulfills this very popular mantra, Pavamana mantra. So in other words, see, this is the thing about chanting. You chant this, and then eventually through Ishwara's grace, eventually we come to this knowledge, and it fulfills that which we have been chanting all along. So therefore, the chanting now no longer needs to continue because you have done the job. So let's chant this mantra. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotir gamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya. Now the verse says that the person who does not have this knowledge, called the Ajnani, destroys himself or herself by himself, by herself. And then Adi Shankara gives us 2 definitions. How is this so? And what does this mean? The first reason why is because the ignorance, which is sustained by the person's actions, is wearing the person's body out, because the person wants to get things into this world, and this wanting, this doing and enjoying, it wears the instrument out. Just like any machine that's used a lot, it gets to be worn out. And why is this so? Because the I, the identity of the person, is placed inside this machine. So in other words, since I'm incomplete and small, what do I want? Since I'm finite, I need to do things to feel a temporary sense of relief. And that doing, that ignorance, that doing because of ignorance, sustains my sense of continuity for more. And why is there continuity? Because of the ignorance. So in other words, ignorance feeds the doing. Doing feeds the ignorance, because when you do, you're too busy enjoying. When you're too busy enjoying, you're too caught up in enjoying or fixing or making things right or avoiding things as a result of doing. And the second reason is because every minute of not knowing one's svarupa, the nature of the self, is as though killing the nature of the self. So there's a nice story called The Acres of Diamonds. And this story is whereby the farmer lived on a huge land, and this land had acres of diamonds. And the farmer had for a long time this dream to become rich. So he thought, let me go outside my land and search for diamonds. They got to be out there. So he spent his whole life searching for diamonds. And one day when he died, obviously he sold his house to the new owner. He didn't find anything, so he died poor. Now the owner one day noticed something shining in the creek. So he walked over to the creek, which is on the land of that former farmer, and he found it was a diamond. And then the new owner, being happy, decided to explore for more. And he found that the entire land was covered with diamonds. In other words, the farmer, the former farmer, was on acres of diamonds. In other words, every day that farmer spent not inquiring or not reassessing his standpoint was as though denying his wealth, his inherent wealth that was right underneath his or her own feet. So in other words, every minute of not claiming one's own nature, because the person chooses to continue the path of what we call preyaha, the path of the instant gratification, right? Easy, quick, just give it to me now. is 1 minute of denying or stuffing under the carpet the nature of the self. Therefore, the person is every minute denying or killing him or herself. So we got two paths. We got the path of preyaha. The path of preyaha means a very common Upanishadic term, which is instant gratification, easy. You don't have to think much. It's just an automatic response. You've done it before, just do it again. Whereas the path of shreyaha is path of hard. It's very difficult, but the amount of work, the amount of benefits that you receive is much greater than preyaha. In fact, one of the common phrases is a successful person does those things which need to be done whether they feel like it or not, whereas an unsuccessful person only does things that are needed when he or she feels like it. So when they get a hug and someone tells them how good they are, only then they say, okay, now I'm happy and I'm going to now act because of these emotions inside his body. Whereas a successful person, despite not feeling good or doesn't want to, they still do it anyway. And in fact, this takes training. And this is what makes this a defining difference between one who succeeds and one who fails. The one who fails says, no, it should be like this. No, it should be a physical meeting. It should be this kind of person. It should be this kind of environment. So in other words, they create different circumstances to justify why they're not in the right place. Whereas a successful person uses the best that they've been given. And from there on, they move forward. Then the verse continues. It says, Na hinasti atmana atmanam tataha yati param gatim. The Jnani does not ruin himself or herself because the Jnani has taken a lot of time, the path of Shreyaha, has done what is necessary, whether they felt like it or not, whether they felt tired or not, they still did their work, their self-inquiry. Whether they got home late from work or not, they still did their self-inquiry. Whether the kids demanded their attention or not, they still found 5 or 10 minutes to do their self-inquiry. Okay, so they discovered the truth, the most attractive, the most beautiful, the most wanted, which is the self, through the path of Shreyaha alone. When I say most wanted, I'm not talking about criminal most wanted. You know, you put a criminal poster, most wanted, self, big rewards. The irony is it is a big reward. So it is the most wanted and it is a huge reward for that too. Now the next verse will be the third benefit of Jnana Yoga. One is free from actions and results of actions. Prakrityaiva cha karmani kriyamanani sarvashaha yav pashyati tathatmanam akartaram sapashyati.
He who sees that by Prakriti alone actions are being performed in all ways, and so too he who sees the self as a non-doer, he alone sees. By this Prakriti alone, Bhagavan says actions are performed. By saying eva alone, he emphasizes that it is not by anything else. All the various karmas, both religious and secular, are being performed by Prakriti alone, and they are being done in various ways, that is, by various organs of actions. Maya itself does not perform action, but has undergone change to become Hiranyagarbha, the total subtle body, and Virat, the total physical body. At the individual level, Prakriti has modified to become the physical body, senses, and mind. Therefore, when a person performs any action, it is because of Chaitanya, consciousness, though consciousness itself performs no action. Because of the Purusha, which remains in Prakriti without performing any action, Prakriti gets vivified and performs all actions. Therefore, Shankara says, the karmas are initiated by the organ of speech and the physical body. Atma, the Purusha, who is pure consciousness, does not perform any action. Atma remains independent of all upadhis, meaning their properties do not belong to Atma.
Verse 29 is benefit number 3. I am akarta. In other words, I was never the doer, and therefore I was never the acquirer of sins and virtues. When I say the word I am referring to you, because it's the one I here. There's no Andre I and then Lorena I, etc. One I. In other words, I am free of sins and virtues. All of the actions belong to the doing instrument. Now, what's the doing instrument? The doing instrument is your worn body, the Prakriti worn body, which has zero connection to you, the Purusha. In fact, the body is made to do things, just to be born. can you make it so that you don't do anything? No, even to sit down on a couch and say, I'm not going to do anything intentionally because I'm going to generate karma, that thinking is also a doing. So just to be born, one is forced to do. And therefore, through the doing, they're going to obviously acquire different virtues and sins, because sometimes the person makes a mistake and sometimes they do very well. And then what happens? Now that they have acquired sins and virtues, now they're expected to enjoy them because you're going to get the consequences back. In other words, to be born, one is forced to be a karta, just to be born. To be forced to be a karta, one is forced to be a bhokta. A bhokta is the enjoyer. In other words, I'm born. What's the connection between a doer and enjoyer? Born, step one. Step two, actions, right? Obviously, in the field, sometimes you punch your friend, sometimes you say sorry. This is punya papa, sins and virtues. Your friend apologizes, or your friend no longer is your friend. There is a consequence. And therefore, you enjoy that or suffer that consequence. That is bhokta. So, karta, bhokta, direct relationship. And as a result of that, there is a sense of, I want to continue and get things right. And therefore, rebirth, because you need to continue exhausting those consequences of the past life. So the verse is saying is that all actions belong to Prakriti, because the Prakriti is governed by the three gunas. Spoiler alert, next chapter, the three gunas. And we will see how that is so. What makes things the way that they are? Obviously, it's going to be a mixture of these three gunas. Obviously, there's more to it. Now, think about it this way. If you, the Purusha, have never done anything, then where's the question of forgiveness? Because we often say, okay, you need to ask God for forgiveness. That is absolutely valid. But once you come to this knowledge and you realize, who comes and says, I'm going to be willingly ignorant so I can make mistakes, and then I can then ask for forgiveness. Does anyone do that? Step one, get born. Okay, I'm going to now ask for ignorance. And then as a result of that ignorance, I'm going to make mistakes. And those mistakes are going to cause punya papam. No one does that. In other words, everyone gets born ignorant. And because everyone gets born ignorant, you can't say that you're at fault. Because you can only be at fault if you willingly chose to be ignorant and then through that make mistakes. But everyone's born ignorant. Therefore, you cannot be at fault, number one. So now where's the question of asking for forgiveness? Who is asking for forgiveness? The Prakriti, the person. But you, can you ask for forgiveness? No, because you are that one in whose presence forgiveness is being asked. By whom? By the person, the jiva, which is none other than the Prakriti. What about afterlife? Afterlife review process. Why would you ask for a review process? Why would you be interested in it? Just hypothetically speaking, suppose there's death, right? And now there's a review process, right? Okay, here's what you've done, here's what you haven't done. Why would you be, as a Purusha, interested in that if you're not a doer? In other words, the review process can only be true, can only be worthy of assessing if you think that all of those actions were done by whom? You. Whereas a jnani recognizes those actions had nothing to do with me because I did not choose to become ignorant. There was a body born, veiled by its nature. It didn't know the nature of Purusha. Therefore, it sought experiences. In seeking experiences, it made mistakes innocently. And sometimes it did virtues. In that, it created punya papa. In that, compelled to have another life. Knowing now that none of that had to do anything with myself, where's the question of reviewing? Whose process are you reviewing? It's not yours, because the person that you're wearing is not you. That person has existed since beginningless time, reborn over and over, exhausting its prarabdha karma as a result of its last life. So when the identity shifts from the person onto the Purusha, the one in whose presence this person is known for what they are, then this entire review process, or I've done wrong or I've done good, that has nothing to do with you whatsoever. In fact, Adi Shankara makes this very nice statement. He says, if one is convinced that one is a karta, a doer, the moment you are convinced that you're a doer, instantly you become accountable for all actions. Just that one single mistake. The moment you destroy this notion that I was never the doer in the first place, I never decided to be ignorant willingly, and both virtues and sins have nothing to do with me, immediately from then on, this entire notion of having to relive one's life for the sake of making things right, it just falls away from that moment on. Now, the solution is what? The solution cannot be to stop actions, because we just said that being alive, you're going to do actions whether we like it or not, nor change the quality of the actions. Of course, do the actions in the light of Dharma, no doubt. But it's not to stop nor to change actions, but rather to recognize the instrument, the doing instrument by which these actions are being done and enjoyed, which is the body-mind, done by the laws and orders coordinated by the Prakriti, the three gunas spoken about in the next chapter. They are not myself. They are what's called anatma, kshetra. Now let's ask the question, how does shifting identity from to akarta, how does that stop rebirth? Before and after. Before, I am karta, I am a doer. After, I am a non-doer. How does that shifting of this I identity placed from doer into non-doer, how does that stop rebirth? Number one, the akarta, the nature of the self, the purusha, never did any actions. Because we said it's nirvikara, nirgunam, without qualities. There's no hands or mouth by which he or she can speak. So Brahman doesn't have hands or mouth and says, okay, so I'm going to do things. In other words, no attributes. And by that means, I cannot do anything. And therefore, I've got no consequences. When I say I'm talking about the Purusha. And the second is Akarta was never born. Therefore, it cannot die. Only that which dies can get reborn. But Akarta is beginningless, was never born. So therefore, shifting identity to that which was never born, immediately from then on, one never dies again. As long as the identity is placed in this birth and death instrument called the body-mind, the I associated with this instrument will undergo the process of birth and death. When that is shifted over into or onto my true Svarupa being Brahman or Purusha, consciousness, then no more birth and death, because Akarta or Purusha is a non-doer and also never began at some point. And what's the nature of Akarta? We said nirgunam, so in other words, without qualities. In other words, there's no hands or legs or arms that Akarta can do anything. Awareness doesn't have senses or any kind of instruments. Satyam pervades everywhere. In other words, is already everywhere. In other words, only an instrument that is localized to a certain place and time has a need to do things. Whereas Satyam, the nature of the self, Akarta, a non-doer, is already everywhere. Therefore, no need to do anything. You're already in and through everything. By your presence, everything is being done because you are the content of the entire universe, as we will see in the next verse. So now, how does this transform into Jivanmukta's words? If you were to say, what does a Jivanmukta's direct thinking sound like if it were to be heard? In my presence, Prakriti does everything. Now, when I say the word my, so much knowledge in that word my goes. It's not like the ahamkara, okay, it's my world now, in my presence, in my body, mind's presence, everything's being done. In other words, when a person says in my presence, that word mind is referring to Purusha. In other words, it's backed up by self-knowledge. Of course, Nyana is not going to say this, but if one were to say it, that's what it would be like. And one last note, if by any chance this teaching of verse 29 motivates or compels a person to do adharma, that is an instant giveaway that this knowledge has not been assimilated. Because people love to hear this idea that I'm not a doer. They go, okay, great, time to party. I can do whatever I want now. So if one person feels like, okay, good, now let me violate some rules, let me violate some laws here for my own good, then what are you actually exposing? Who wants to violate? The person, the body-mind. The body-mind wants to enjoy by violating, and yet the person is saying, I am a karta. In other words, it's giving away that the person, the self, has still not been placed in the right place. It's still localized to the body-mind. And we can prove this easily. A person who says, I am not a doer, and yet they want to do adharmic acts, they're still fearful of getting caught. In other words, I don't want my body to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. What is that exposed? And yet they're claiming they're a karta, that which is other than the body. Right there exposes that the identity is still placed in the body. The next verse will be the fourth benefit of self-knowledge. which says that I am the cause of the universe. A human being thinks I'm an effect of the universe. I'm an effect of my parents, an effect of circumstances. No, this is a Jivanmukta's understanding. I am the cause of the whole universe. Yada bhuta prathag bhavam ekastham anupashyati tata eva cha vistaram brahma sampadyate tada.
When one sees clearly the condition of distinction in the beings as having its existence in one, Atman, and from that alone it is projection, distinctions, then he gains Brahman.
Anadidvan nirgunatvat paramatmayam avyayaha sharirasthopi kaunteya nakaroti nalipyate.
Kantuye Arjuna, this limitless self, being beginningless and without attributes, is imperishable. Even though obtaining in the body, it does not perform action and is not affected by results of actions.
Yatha sarvagatam saukshmyad akasham no palipyate sarvatra vasthito dehe tathatma no palipyate.
Just as all pervasive space, because it is subtle, is not affected, so too the self, abiding in all states in the body, is not affected.
Yatha prakasha yatyekaha kritsnam lokam imam ravihi kshetram kshetri tatha kritsnam prakashyati bharata.
Arjuna, just as one sun illumines this entire world, so too one who obtains in the illumines the entire Shastra.
Kshetra kshetrajnayor evam antaram Nyana chakshusha bhuta prakriti moksham cha ye viduryanti te param.
Those who in this manner know the distinction between the kshetra and the kshetrajna through the eye of wisdom and know the freedom from prakriti, the cause of the beings, they go to the ultimate end.
So verse 30 is the fourth benefit, and it says that you are the Jagat Karanam, cause of the world. In other words, the substratum of this whole world. By the way, never say that you're the cause of the world in public. People think you're crazy. So this is specifically within class environment, because there's so much understanding to say this. Otherwise, it sounds like a crazy delusional statement. Or this understanding is also mentioned in verse 19 of Kaivalya Upanishad. So this is from where Krishna is borrowing. And this verse in Kaivalya Upanishad says that in me alone is the world born. In me does everything get sustained. And in me, everything resolves. I am that one without a second. Very beautiful verse, and it succinctly summarizes the understanding of a Jivanmukta. So now the question is, how do you understand this verse? That in you alone is everything, or from which everything is born. By you alone is everything sustained, and in you everything is resolved. You are that one without a second, the Advaitam Satchid Ananda. The first way to understand is we use a dream example, a very common example in Vedanta. The dream is a product of the waker's mind. So now we can equate the dream to the Jagat. We can equate the mind to Maya, and we can equate the waker to Brahman. In other words, we can equate the dream to the effect that we're experiencing, including your body. That's an effect. We can equate the mind of the waker to Prakriti, and we can equate the waker to Purusha. So the dream is a product of the waker's mind. And upon waking, the waker realizes that this dream was sustained by this one waker. This dream was born out of this one waker, and this dream was resolved into none other than the waker. In whom does the dream resolve into? Your partner? No, it resolves into you, the waker alone. So this shows us on a microcosmic level a direct reflection of the macrocosmic example. In other words, the macrocosmic and microcosmic, there's always a correlation between, as that's why they say, as above, so below. So just like that. Now let's take this onto a macrocosmic understanding, what do we have? 3 states. We have the waking, we have the dream, and we have the deep sleep. All of them are known to be individual states. Now, some sessions ago, I said logic. In order to know the 2, you have to be other than the 2. We call that the 3rd. In order to know the 3 states, you have to be the turiya, the 4th. In other words, in order to know 5, you have to be the 6th. To know 7, you have to be the 8th. So it doesn't matter. You're always that one other than what is being known. In other words, it can only be known or observed for what it is, because there is an independent reality in whose presence those individual components are illumined by. In other words, by whom or by what are these 3 states illumined by? None other than yourself. And how do we prove this? Easy. Have you heard of waking state before? Yes. Have you heard of dream state before? Yes. Have you heard of deep sleep state before? Yes. So in other words, there's already something about you as a person in whose presence these 3 states are recognized. In other words, these 3 states are using what's called a substratum, just like the dream is using a substratum of the waker's mind. In that same way, these 3 states that we all are aware of, that we all know, are only because of you, the one in whom these 3 states are illumined, are known. So knowledge of the 3 states. By what are these 3 states known? It cannot be by the state itself, because do you know about the waking inside your dream? For example, when you're inside a dream, do you know about your waking body? Absolutely not. There is no connection. In fact, your dream thirst cannot satiate your thirst of the physical person lying in bed. There is no connection whatsoever. In a waking state, you recognize that there are these 3 states. How is that possible? Obviously, whatever about you recognizes these 3 states are, has to be the 4th, has to be other than these 3 states. And that's why we all know about these 3 states. The second way by which we can understand or grasp what verse 19 Kaivalya Upanishad is saying, as I just said, is you can apply self-inquiry. You can say, what about this experience right now is pure existence? And what about this experience right now is Prakriti? What about this experience right now is pure awareness, consciousness? Clear. What about this experience right now is the sensory data, body, thought processes, prana, right? The life force flowing through the body, aliveness of the body. That's all Prakriti. Despite all of that, what about this experience is pure awareness, self-inquiry? That answer has to be clear. The third example, how we understand or grasp the statement that I said earlier, was we use a space consciousness example. And space is a very good example because space is the closest or the subtlest mithya reality that we have to consciousness. In fact, you cannot think of a more accurate, better example to compare consciousness than space, because space is the subtlest of the subtlest. So we'll start out with a simple fact. Space is from which this entire universe arises. The scientists also show us this. Space-time first, beginning of the universe, Big Bang, space-time first. In fact, even black holes can suck up so many things. Nothing can escape. I'm sure a few things can escape, but for the general purposes, nothing can escape from a black hole. Can a black hole suck up space? As rare or as subtle as a black hole is, it cannot touch space, because if it were to touch space, then where's the black hole going to go? It has to be accommodated by something. In fact, the scientists are still having a hard time deciding what's on the other side of a black hole. They call it a singularity. That's the term they use. Now, where does all that matter go and light? Into one single singularity, into potential. This is where we need Vedanta to help us explain on the other side. In fact, if you want a close example of what is the Big Crunch like or the Big Bang like, just look at a black hole. Matter goes into what? Singularity. And then what? Goes into potential. Now I know couple of billions of years from now, someone's going to probably develop a technology and they're going to say, no, see, it goes into something smaller. It doesn't matter. You know why? Because then the question is going to be the same. Okay, and then what is that smaller going to? In other words, it's always going to go into space itself. In fact, according to the scientific model, 13.7 billion years, 300,000 years after the creation came, after the universe manifested, first atoms were hydrogen and helium. From where did they come from if there was nothing before then? Space. In other words, space is the absolute cause of this manifest universe. There's nothing behind. In fact, yes, now you can say there's prakriti, there's intelligence. However, from the standpoint of the manifest, space is the cause. And also, you cannot say that space is a emptiness or a nothingness. Scientists had a long time to decide what is space. Space is simply the subtlest of the subtlest matter. In fact, space to us is like water is to fish. The fish is going around in the sea going, where's the water? What is this water you're talking about? From our standpoint, we can see that water. But we human beings are going, what is this space? What is he talking about? But you cannot know space so easy. Yes, you can know it, but you cannot know it so easy because it is all pervading. Why? Because everything arises out of space. So let's give you a space example, how space is the cause of everything. And therefore, then I'll equate it how you, consciousness, are the cause of everything. So we start with two realities inside this room, inside your room. Number one, there is your room, yeah? And number two, there is a space which is accommodating all of the object in that room. Then I say, space is not only step two, not only inside your room, but also inside every enclosure, including this room, including the cup that I just saw someone drinking, including your lungs, including your mouth, including the stomach. All of that has space inside. And then I say, space is not only inside every enclosure, but also outside every enclosure. And then I say, actually, all enclosures are inside space. They're accommodated inside space. Now, according to Shastra, as I just said earlier, space is the subtlest of the subtlest matters in the universe. And for that reason, it is the cause of everything. And what is this attribute of space? It has no attributes, which is really interesting. That which has no attributes, from that comes attribute for universe. From an attributeless space comes the attribute of helium and nitrogen atom 300,000 years after the Big Bang. So what does this show us? All things are, in this model of this creation, physical creation, all things are coming out of space, sustained by space, and going to none other than space. Space is all pervasive. How do you understand this? Right now, what's going through your body? Wi-Fi signals. Don't see it, don't feel it, but it's happening right now. And yet Wi-Fi is not the subtlest of the subtlest. What's even subtler than Wi-Fi? Space itself. That's why we say space is all pervasive. Just like Wi-Fi right now is pervading your physical body, your brain, and Wi-Fi is not the subtlest of the subtlest. Now think about space. That is definitely pervading your entire body right now. Now let's bring this example to consciousness. So I was just showing you how space is the cause of everything. What about consciousness? So we say with the same, and first of all, consciousness is not space, by the way. Consciousness is even subtler than space. Number one, we say within my body, there is consciousness. To make it very personal, within my body, there is consciousness. And then you say step two, actually, consciousness is not only within my body, it's also within your body, everyone's body, your neighbor's body. The consciousness in all of our bodies is one and the same. There's no Goknur consciousness and Andre consciousness and Julie consciousness. Now, that's easy to say, but how do you demonstrate this? How do you demonstrate that my consciousness is not different from your consciousness? Think about this and answer me. How do you demonstrate that our consciousness is not different?
I'd say deep sleep, because when you're in deep sleep, this causal state, you're not experiencing anything as such, time duration, any objects, but you're still conscious because you're in the seed state. So when you wake up, everything appears again. So everyone's equal in that regard.
Good. Okay.
Everyone has the same deep sleep.
Good. Okay, that's a very good logic I haven't thought of. What other conclusive logic can you tell me to demonstrate that your consciousness is not different from my consciousness, is not different from mosquito's consciousness?
Because the consciousness has no attributes, so you can't, it's no attributes, then there's no differences. It has to be the same.
Okay, good. So this is the most perfect answer you can give. In other words, the moment you attribute differences, you have to do what? You have to attribute an attribute onto that. You have to say, my consciousness is blue and your consciousness is red. Therefore, it is different. But consciousness by nature has no attributes. So how can you say that my consciousness, which has no attributes, is different from your consciousness, which has no attributes? Can't say that because consciousness has no attributes. Therefore, like space, it is able to pervade everything and not get tainted or contaminated by that which it accommodates. And then you say the final statement that the consciousness is throughout all bodies the same. You say, actually, all bodies are resting in, sustained by, and resolve into consciousness. And that consciousness, I am. And then finally, bhuta pratak bhavam ekastam anupashyati. So the Jivanmukta recognizes that the manifold things, bhuta, are resting in me, ekastam, the non-dual self. All of these names and forms in this world right now are resting in you. Yes, I get it. It feels like they're not resting because, you know, Maya is incredibly powerful. But in reality, all of these names and forms, prakriti of colors and shapes and size and senses, right now are resting in you alone. The ekastam, the non-dual self. And for that reason, you are the cause of creation. Everything arises out of you, is sustained by you right now, not in the future, right now, and resolves into you. Okay, the next verse will say that Jnani doesn't have any karma palams. In other words, doesn't have any consequences or anything to experience in the future. So that was verse 30. I'm now going on to verse 31. The fifth benefit is Jnani is untouched by anything. Yes, your body is touched, definitely. Your body is touched by cosmic radiation right now, by Wi-Fi signals right now. But you, the consciousness, are not touched by anything. Sharirastaha api. Upon waking up means upon the dawn of self-knowledge, when the knowledge is complete and firm, self-knowledge. Upon the recognitions of one's svarupa, and it doesn't go on and off, it's permanent, permanently established. The Jivanmukta continues wearing this body given to him or her at the time of birth. However, na karoti, na lipyate. The Jivanmukta is neither the doer nor is affected by what happens to that body, because it's happening to the body, but not the Jivanmukta, the self, the all-pervading consciousness. Now, what's the difference between waking up in a dream and waking up from ignorance, from this beginningless avidya? What's the difference? Waking up from a dream, what happens? The entire dream world ceases. It stops immediately. It resolves into the waker. But when we say waking up, dawn of knowledge, the world continues because the world still is sustained by Ishwara's laws and orders. The prakriti is still there for every other jiva to continue exhausting their karma. So it's not like the world disappears. The world continues. However, that which continues, the world, there's a different relationship to it. In other words, the Jnani says or understands, this body which is being worn is an incidental body given to me at the time of birth. It's like a dream body. And whatever happens to this dream body, it does not affect me, the waker. Just like whatever happens in the dream, it does not affect the person in the bed. Whatever gain or loss happens to this body, it is not my loss. It is not my gain. In the presence of me, this body is receiving the gains and losses. This incidental body is like that of a dream. And I, the waker, am lending existence not only to this body, but to the entire universe. What happens to this universe is only because of my own presence. And when he says my own presence, I'm not referring to any person, I'm referring to the one self. Accordingly, the verse continues, Ayam Paramatma Avyayaha. Paramatma is just another name for self or Atman or Purusha or Kshetrajna or the knower or Brahman. So there's so many names here. So Paramatma, the self, is Avyayaha, not changed by anything. Can the waker get wet by dream rain? No. Can the waker get burned by dream fire? Does the waker get quenched by dream thirst? No. No correlation whatsoever. As I said last week, there's no or association between rope and a snake. The waker is not modified by the dream. Like that, Paramatma, the self, is not modified by this body, by the universe. Finally, this Paramatma is anaditvat, without a beginning. So you are without a beginning. You were never born at some point. Nothing gave you birth, you, the Purusha. And the nature of this one that is beginningless is infinitely big, absolutely complete. It means nothing missing. So Brahma never goes, oh, I need some Maya, to entertain me. I want to forget myself so I can experience being loved. Let me incarnate back on earth as a Jiva. I'm going to find someone and I'm going to have them love me and I will love them because I want to know what it's like. I'm bored of being awareness existence. That was never the case. In other words, the Jiva was never enlightened at some point in the past and then forgot and now has to come back. This is a common notion we have in the spiritual world. There's only one self-realization, only one enlightenment. That is it, in one life. In other words, every person that is ever born was never enlightened at some past life. It only happens once. And once it happens, when a person dies, called Videha Mukti, there's no more rebirth. Why? Because anaditvat, in other words, beginningless. I am beginningless and whole, infinitely big and absolutely complete. Therefore, there's no reason to incarnate again, because that means there's a desire, and desire means I'm incomplete. Therefore, if I get this, I will maybe complete myself. But being complete, there's no desires to incarnate again. The next verse will talk about how Atman is never touched by anything. Right now, how you're not touched by anything. I know your body's touched, but how you are not touched. So Krishna in verse 32 says that even though Atman is associated with everything, I know in the last verse I said Atman is not associated, the rope is not associated to the snake, but in this context, when I say associated, I mean pervading in and through. It is not affected by that which Atman is associated with. Now, Krishna uses two lovely examples, and you cannot get better of an example than example number one in verse 32 that we're now talking about. Atman is being compared to Akasha, space. Why is that so? Because space is the closest metaphor, as I said already, the closest prakriti, mithya metaphor to the formless self, to the formless Purusha. What is the contrast between space and Atman? When I say Atman, I'm talking about Purusha and Kshetrajna. So these different names. What is the contrast? Now, I want you to listen and contemplate on this, because to understand Atman, one of the best ways to understand Atman yourself is to understand space, because we just said space is that which is the subtlest of the subtlest that we can possibly grasp with our intellect. So if you can grasp space, then you can grasp Atman. Both are one of a kind. In other words, there's no two kinds of space. There's no polluted space and clean space. If we have a room right now and we chant beautiful songs, the space doesn't get more joyful because of that. And then we walk out and then we have a cold group of something, some people chanting some words of non-wisdom. The space doesn't get contaminated by that. So no matter what space you're talking about, space here, space there, space, outer space, different dimension space, it is still one and the same space. There's no two kinds of spaces. Now, yes, someone's going to say, yes, there is. There is waker space and there is dreamlike space. Of course, you can always bring an exception to this. I'm just talking in general. There's no, this space is what? Attributeless. That's what I want to say. It is attributeless right here, and it's also attributeless right there. And that is the only reason why it's able to accommodate whatever is within space. Neither space nor Atman have opposites. Now, I know someone's going to say, yes, space does have an opposite. There is no space. But what's the counter to that? You're only saying no space in relation to an object, but that object is still within space. It's still accommodated by space. So space has no opposites. Consciousness has no opposites. Space is all pervading. And for that reason, it cannot move because it's already everywhere. Only that which is not all pervading has a need to move from A to B. But that which is everywhere, it cannot move because it's already there. Last verse said, your nature, Paramatma, infinitely big. In other words, where are you? You're already everywhere. infinitely pervading this entire existence. If, in other words, the entire existence is yours alone. Space cannot get out of shape, younger or older, because it is attributeless, as I just discussed. Both are partless. In other words, space doesn't have its sister space, come complete me, be my relative. In other words, there's no parts like a puzzle space, let's put space together. It is formless everywhere, all pervasive. Both are associated with everything, and yet they're not tainted by that which they are associated with. I just use that example now. Words of wisdom, space remains just as it is. Words of adharma, space remains as it is. We blow up atomic bombs. In that very place, the moment that atomic bomb is gone, what remains? Space. Space that was there just waiting for someone to blow up the atomic bomb. Radiation gone, space remains. Both accommodate everything. Just like this entire universe is accommodated by space itself and everything arises out of space, consciousness is that from which even space itself arises. And that consciousness, you are, I am. And finally, both are intellectually difficult to comprehend. I did an example of this some time ago. If you think about Earth, very easy. You can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it, you can touch it, you can smell it. The more you go subtle, fire, you can only see fire, but you cannot smell fire, you cannot taste fire. But you can already see it, it's okay. The moment you go to air, or it becomes harder. Air, okay, I can move my hand. Wind, that's air. Okay, I can feel air, good. The moment you go to space, much harder to intellectually grasp. So both of them are hard to intellectually grasp. As I said, scientists for a long time had a problem discerning what is space. Some of them said it's nothing, it's emptiness. Space is not nothing or emptiness. Space is, as I said, subtlest of the subtlest matter that's able to pervade everything. How to understand this? Right now, cosmic radiation is pervading you. You're already being pervaded by so many signals, TV signals, channel 5, channel 6, channel 8, mobile signals. And space is that which pervades even those Wi-Fi signals, the cosmic radiation. And then consciousness is even which pervades space itself. Accordingly, sarvagatam akasham, space, na upalipyate. In other words, the all-pervading space remains unaffected because it is the most subtlest of all in creation. And this Atma is like space. In other words, only the subtle can pervade the gross. The gross cannot pervade the subtle. Just like if you have a hierarchy in a corporation, whatever happens on top, it spills down. If something happens on the bottom, the general people where they work, it doesn't really reach the top. It doesn't touch the top. So only that which is the most subtle, whatever happens there, everything else gets affected from then on. It's just a little analogy there. Okay, next verse, Krishna will compare Atma to the second best example that we have to Atma, which is light. So the first example, the best example you can compare Atma, yourself, to is space. Second is light. When I say light, I'm talking about sunlight, not the sun itself, the sunlight. So verse 33 from now on. Verse 33 comes from Katha Upanishad. So again, we can see how Krishna is borrowing different statements from different Upanishads. That's why we say the Bhagavad Gita is nothing but the Upanishads, a summary of all of them. So Atma here is being compared to the light. Again, now let's contrast light and Atman and yourself. Neither gets sullied by whatever they brighten up. In other words, light equally brightens up the good, the bad, and the ugly. Lightens up the sinner's actions, no more or less than lights up the saint's actions. 3 people, different lives. One has bad intentions, one has good intentions. Light doesn't go, I'm gonna not shine on you so much. No, light just shines. So they both brighten up equally. Whatever that is, whatever mind we're talking about, a polluted mind, a clean mind, consciousness brightens up equally all minds. The second is both make known whatever object they shine upon. So again, you got different objects, different colors, and you got one light. The light makes known all of those colors. One light. Now, yes, some colors reflect more light, some colors reflect less light. But is that anything to do with the light? No, that has to do with the reflecting medium. So if the reflecting medium is dark, has a lot of tamas, then it's going to reflect a lot less light. If it has a lot of sattva guna, then it's going to reflect a lot more light. In that same case, when a mind is pure, sattvic, chapter 14, it reflects much more clarity than a mind that is still entangled with kind of just more naughty stuff, deliberately naughty stuff. Neither can get tasted, smelled, felt, seen, or heard. Cannot hear light, cannot even see light. You say, yes, I can. No, you can't. You can only see light in respect to a reflecting medium. You cannot see light photons directly. Furthermore, if you were to see, hear, taste, smell light, then, or consciousness, then you would be objectifying it in your mind. Oh, okay, I'm feeling light. I'm feeling, the light is coming onto me. They have these exercises, just imagine being bathed by the light of the angels. This is all in the mind. So this is being objectified. Now, both also have something in common. Both are revealed by the help of reflecting medium. I use the example of the hand. To reveal the light, I first need to show you the reflecting medium. And then I say, because you see this, is because the light is shining upon it. In the same case, because you are conscious, it has to mean that there is a conscious being. In other words, you first need the effect. And what is the effect? The person. And what's the effect? A conscious being. The conscious being is aware, alert, conscious. Therefore, that being is pervaded by this one consciousness. Okay, let's create an objection. Suppose you say light doesn't change in the presence of an object that it shines upon. Okay, that's very easy to understand. So light shines, and the light is never contaminated by whatever it shines upon. How do you apply this how do you explain this for Atman? How do you say now, Atman is never contaminated by whatever it illumines, whatever thoughts it illumines, or Atman doesn't change in the presence of thoughts? Okay, that's a statement of fact, but how do you demonstrate this? That you, consciousness, do not change in the presence of thoughts.
Because your thoughts come and go. If Atman changed with the thoughts, consciousness doesn't come and go. So we don't have that experience of coming and going. The thoughts come and go.
Good. So in other words, in order to report that an object has changed from state A into state B, there has to be an independent C that remained the same during A and remains the same during B. Is this clear? So an object goes from state A into state B. How do you know that? How do you know that there's a change? That can only be done in the presence of that one who remained the same during state A and remains the same during state B. In other words, to report A to B, I have to be other than A and B. I have to be C. So this is an ABC formula. In the morning, I was grumpy. Now I am cheerful. Okay. Now, what makes it relatable that there was a grumpiness and there's cheerfulness? That which is other than the grumpiness and other than the cheerfulness. Now, I know, bring in a biologist, and I've heard all the arguments, and you can go endlessly with the arguments how consciousness is actually a product of neurology. The fact that you were grumpy and now you're cheerful is a product of your hippocampus in the brain, which is responsible for transferring the short-term memory into long-term memory. How the sense of continuity can also be a product of the subtle body. For example, we bring in Jainism and we go into philosophy, and they will say that no, this consciousness is just your soul, and the soul is a subtle body. So there's no sense of this different. There's one and the same. So here's your homework, by the way. Demonstrate 3 ways how consciousness is not your neurological activity. How is consciousness not the brain? And 2, demonstrate in 3 ways how is consciousness not the subtle body. The subtle body means your thoughts and emotions. Okay, let's convert this into self-inquiry or meditation. You can say, my nature is like space. My nature is like the light. Now note, you can only say that after having gone through this lesson. If I just say, go and say this, I am like space, I am like the light, it means nothing. So this is how the teaching takes place. Only once we understand the metaphorical teaching, only then you can make a statement about it. So you can say in meditations, I am like space, I am like light. And then you think about it, how is that so? What does that mean? The second is you can say, Atman obtains in all states of the mind. the grumpy state and the cheerful state. Atman gives way to all states. In other words, here, go. It's okay. Cheerfulness, go. Grumpy, go. It's okay. You can go. Atman lets all states be as they are. It doesn't interfere. In other words, Atman remains the non-interfering witness. Atman gently whispers to everything, it is so. I'm grumpy. It is so. I'm happy. It is so. Confused. It is so. I'm ignorant. It is so. I'm enlightened. It is so. I don't know. It is so. I'm angry. It is so. Super happy. It is so. I feel lucky. It is so. Unlucky. It is so. Constantly allowing all states of mind to be as they are, never interfering with anything. Verse 34 is the final benefit of this self-knowledge, which is moksha itself. So verse 34, the final benefit is the devotee has fulfilled the ultimate purpose while living, has reached the highest goal, has gained the highest qualification, which ironically doesn't get you a job. Boss, let me see your resume. Yeah, I've understood who I am. Nope. Even though it's the highest qualification, nobody cares. This is the great irony, the great joke. I want to see, everything else that you've been doing so many other lifetimes before. So the goal that has no return, every other goal has a return, come back. But this one goal, the highest one, has no return. And why is there no return? Because the Jivanmukta understands, I am the existence, the content of all names and forms. Everything is borrowed from me alone. Therefore, there's no question of coming back. What are you going to come back into if you're already that? Why would you want to come back into that if you're already everywhere and everything at the same time? This Jivanmukta, who or what is she? In fact, let's not put a gender onto it. What is the Jivanmukta? Kshetra, kshetrajnayoho, antaram. So antaram is distinction, the one who has firm distinction, antaram, between kshetra and kshetrajna. In other words, between the knower and the known, between consciousness and matter, between Purusha and Prakriti. Firm, assimilated, clear vision. That is a Jivanmukta. Furthermore, Bhuta Prakriti Moksham. In this case, moksha means freedom, the one that knows with firm conviction that I am free from Prakriti. That means from the body, mind, from actions, from enjoyment, from sins, from virtues, from this, from that, from everything. And such a person, continues the verse, discovers or has discovered Nyana Chakshuhu, the inner eye of wisdom. What is this wisdom? For example, you can't see electricity in a fan, but you can see the fan spinning. Now, how do you know electricity is there? Because you understand. Because this fan is spinning, there must be electricity. In that same way, when it comes between the kshetra and kshetrajna, the subject and the object, I can't know myself as an object of knowledge. Why? Because to know myself as an object of knowledge, the question arises, in whose presence is such a knowledge made known? It has to be the subject. In other words, it's impossible to turn yourself into an object, because to do that, you always have to then ask, in whose presence is such a knowledge recognized? Is such a knowledge made to be true? In other words, what is a Jnana Chakshuhu? It is an understanding. Even though I do not see or cannot feel myself directly, just by the fact that whatever comes up, whatever experience comes up, whatever is felt, known, smelled, heard, touched, just the fact that there is a recognition of that, it is so, implies what? The existence of a conscious subject, a conscious being. And how is this Jnana Chakshuhu attained? 4 factors. Shastra, teacher, yourself, and Ishvara's grace. All these 4 have to come together in a perfect timing with incredible grace, with so many circumstances that took you to that place to meet these 4 for one to gain this Jnana Chakshuhu. And that can only happen how? By having a lot of punyam behind you. You may not recognize it. You say, why am I so lucky? But you do not remember what you've done in your past lifetimes to receive all of these 4 coming together at the same time. And this ends chapter 13, the distinction between the knower, yourself, kshetrajna, and the known, the kshetram, the field, the prakriti. In other words, you can also rename this into Purusha Prakriti Yoga or Kshetra Kshetrajna Yoga. Actually, one of the most profound chapters in the Bhagavad Gita, because it is the complete teaching of self-knowledge. There's no higher so-called teaching that you can receive than chapter 13 of the Gita. In fact, all of the Upanishads, like I just explained in the Kaivalya Upanishad, I am that one by which everything is born of, sustained by, and everything resolves into, I am that one without a second. All of these statements are included inside chapter 13.